Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
And welcome to NHL Wraparound, our conference finals preview for May 19th, 2025. Vic Morren, Neil Smith, and once again, we will be joined by Craig Button from TSN to go over both conference final series. Nobody more fun to talk hockey with than Craig Button.
No, he's great, and I'm looking forward to that conversation and his picks and our standings and everything.
Before we do that, we need to hit three things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. Number one, Sunday evening, the Florida Panthers secure the final seat at the Final Four table by taking out the Toronto Maple Leafs in Game 7 by a 6-1 score. They will meet the Carolina Hurricanes in the East Final, a completely dominant effort by Paul Maurice's troops.
Yes, it certainly was. And this will be the third straight year that they've advanced to the conference final. And it might have taken them 7 games, but they did it in a decisive way.
Number two, for the Maple Leafs, it is their 7th consecutive Game 7 loss that ties a mark that is held by the Colorado Avalanche, who got to that mark by dropping their 7th game in Dallas in the opening round. But for Toronto, big changes forthcoming.
Yeah, and you know what? It's always distasteful to me to talk about changes because I know what it feels like to be one of those changes that goes the wrong way. But they're going to have to do something because the window is closing for guys like Auston Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, John Tavares. They're I don't know what it is, Vic. If you said to me, "You be GM, what would you do?" I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's a nightmare.
I think it's safe to say that if there is a core four, there's going to be a new member in there somewhere.
Yeah, well, don't forget what I keep saying too. I think Nyes is going to be a big part of this team going forward. He's not going anywhere. So we'll see who is not back next year. Is number 16 still going to be worn by Mitch Marner? Is there going to be a number 91? I think 88 and 34 will still be there. But it's just another summer in Toronto.
Marner and Tavares, UFAs, Matthew Nyes, RFA, and he's going to command a pretty big payday. So certainly a busy summer ahead for Brad Treliving and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Number three, the conference finals open on Tuesday, and here's the TV schedule. TNT has the East. Florida and Carolina will start in Raleigh, as again mentioned, on Tuesday. Every other day, 8 o'clock start times. The West Final will be carried by ESPN starting on Wednesday, with Edmonton visiting Dallas. All games, 8 o'clock on ESPN, with the exception of Game 3, which would be in Edmonton Sunday at 3 o'clock Eastern on ABC. And that wraps up 3 things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc.
All right, and we've got Craig Button back again to help us preview now the conference finals. And Craig, I got to say, this is an odd year in the Stanley Cup playoffs for the fact there's been no shockers. Like you don't get St. Louis beating Winnipeg in that first round, which, happens from year to year. This year, really no shockers, right?
No, and some games that won your series that went down to the wire, went to a game 7. Some little bit of drama where you thought maybe there could be a shocker, but there really hasn't been. If there was one that I would say that could be on the small shock scale, would be the way that Carolina manhandled Washington. Washington scored 4 goals in the 4 losses to Carolina, and when I say it wasn't so much that they lost. It was more the way Carolina really took it to them and didn't really give Washington very much at all.
Yeah.
Before we start, let's hit our second round picks.
Mm-hmm.
And Neil, you're in first place. Go 3-1 in round number 2. You've got a 9-3 series record overall. Craig, you're at 8-4. You went 3-1 as well. And of course, I'm taking the show money at 7-5, going 2-2. So we all won with Dallas and Edmonton. We all lost picking Washington. And, remember I mentioned on Cup Date on Sunday that last night's game was a big one because you and Craig had the Panthers and I had the Maple Leafs, and thus the difference in the standings. So, before we get into everything for today, I just want to go over one thing because both of you have been accused of, actually, you've accused yourselves of playing chicken in this and going 7 games. And you did pick Florida in 7, so that's fine. But I want you guys to both know that you're on notice to fly in the coop in this round. And here's why. So those of you that are listening, as opposed to watching, this is a picture of me along with the San Diego chicken, which was shot about 9 years ago on the property of the late, great Bill Walton. We were doing a shoot for Home Run Derby for ESPN, and this was shot on Walton's property, which, by the way, a full-blown teepee on that property, and Walton was a San Diego native. So that's why I was there with the chicken, but I thought it would be symbolic of where you guys are at right now. So
I'd like to have that outfit for these predictions because I'd like to wear that when I go full chicken.
Well, we'll see if it's part of the wraparound budget going forward, whether we can order one for you. So let's start, gentlemen, with the Eastern Final, Carolina and Florida. Carolina advances by beating both the Devils and the Capitals in 5. Florida advances by taking out the Lightning in 5 and Toronto in 7. It's their second playoff meeting. They met just 2 years ago. Once again, in the Eastern Final, it was a 4-0 sweep for the Panthers, all 1-goal games, and included in that was a 4-overtime game, an overtime game, and a game that was decided with 5 seconds left in regulation of Game 4, all goals coming from Matt Tkachuk. And Craig, I'll start with you. I still think Rod Brind'Amour is trying to wrap his head around how they lost that series.
Yeah, but when you talk about 4 overtimes, overtime, 5 seconds left in the game, when you get to that point in the playoffs, the margins are real thin, and you got to find a way to get on the right side of it. And, every team that loses can bemoan, well, we were close. Well, you lost. The whole idea here is to win. Florida found a way to win, and top teams win. Ask Neil about winning. Like, does it matter how Stefan Matteau scored the overtime winner in Game 7? No, they found a way to win. So, again, coaches go, well, we were close, and the players know they were close, but we look at the end and say, okay, but what else happened over the course of the game where you could have been on the right side of it? And you find there's a lot of things that have to go right when you win. There's no question about it. Nobody would argue with that, Vic. But Rod Brind'Amour has a good team, and he has a good team that just, I think, stifled the Washington Capitals. I think a very good Washington Capitals team. And now you're playing against a team that's the same but different. Your team is similar in the way it plays but different. Sets up as a pretty good Eastern Conference final. And Rod Brind'Amour does a heck of a job really keeping his team in a place where they know what they are and they do exactly what they know they can do.
It's two very different types of pressure, isn't it? It's the heaviness, it's the griminess, it's the jam of Florida against the speed and shoot from everywhere mentality in 3-zone pressure by the Hurricanes.
It is, and it's going to be. That's why my point on this series is going to be the goaltending, because the Hurricanes are going to test Bobrovsky over and over and over again. But Bobrovsky has proven to be a much better playoff goaltender than Freddie Anderson, other than this year when he's been excellent so far this year. But can he keep that up against the Panthers? We'll see. But I think therein lies the big advantage for the Panthers is in goal.
Craig, what do you see here in that for 2 rounds, the Hurricanes have done a very good job protecting their goaltenders, primarily Anderson. Pyotr Kochetkov had to come in for a couple of games while Anderson was out. But I think we saw in the Washington series in particular that the Capitals got very little traffic. They got very little pressure. And credit to the Canes, they made Anderson's job much easier than I think it's going to be in this series against Florida.
Oh, we talk about the way Carolina plays with that pressure, with that speed, is, really try to, with all the shot mentality, a lot of it creates a lot of chaos, shall we say. There's no predictability. They're just going to shoot it and chase it down. And I think that's the way Carolina plays. But Florida can really press you, and they can press you in the offensive zone. And the biggest thing for me in this series, I shouldn't say but one of the big things in this series is going to be the neutral zone. I think that Carolina did a great job against Washington in transitioning, quick ups, and, that we saw Taylor Hall score breakaway goals there. But Florida Panthers, they're as good a neutral zone team as I've seen in the last few years. And so now, not only do you have to alleviate the pressure in your own zone to get out, you also have to get through the neutral zone. I'm not talking about clogging up the neutral zone. I'm talking about how they come back through the neutral zone and then just fire right back on you. That's going to be the big challenge for Carolina, because when we look at the Florida Panthers, they know that this is their style of game that has produced success. Can Carolina handle it? We'll see.
Another area that I'm looking at here is the depth of the Panthers came through enormously, particularly that series against Toronto, with that third line, Brad Marchand, Eetu Luostarinen, and Anton Lundell. And how does Carolina match up against that line? Do they have the depth through 4 lines to match up with the Panthers?
I think they have the depth. I'll tell you one advantage that they're going to have over Florida, guys. And I don't know, Craig and Vic, if you've thought of this. Because I work, Craig, with Mr. Television over here, I get to know all about TV scheduling and why games are scheduled when they are, because it makes absolutely no sense to me that the Panthers have to leave Toronto and get to Raleigh and only have 24 hours off before they play the next game. And yet the West, who's already been off for a couple of days, doesn't play till Wednesday. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But here's the thing that I think is a real advantage for Rod Brind'Amour. They've been studying the Florida Panthers throughout this series with Toronto because they ended so early, and they're going to have their guys really prepared. He's going to know what they did wrong last year, or in 23, sorry. He's going to have learned lessons from that. He's going to have learned lessons from what his own team has been doing, but he's going to have watched this team and see how Toronto exposed on that odd game, let's say game 6, how Toronto exposed some cracks in the armor of the Panthers. I think that's, Craig, a bit of an advantage. Well, I know it's an advantage for the players because they're rested, but I think that's also an advantage for Rod Brind'Amour.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is that you come off a seventh game victory. There's an emotional part of that too. That there's a come down that you have to get up again now to play a hungry team, and you're going into Raleigh. You're playing Carolina. You're not going home to try to draw some energy from your fans. You're going to their place. And I think that is an advantage early on, and it'll be interesting to see if Carolina can grab a hold of that advantage, because you jump out 1-0, you now get a little more control in the series. That to me has to be one of the significant goals of the Carolina Hurricanes is a game 1 victory over Florida.
And Craig, what I want to ask you one other thing as an ex-GM. Here, it's weird. Does Florida get to practice at all before they play? Because they're flying to, I would imagine maybe they flew last night and maybe they scheduled an afternoon practice. I don't know what their schedule would have been with only 24 hours in between and having to have them ready to go with a new booklet of idiosyncrasies of a new team. You know how they do it today. They got everything ready. There's a playbook for everybody. Do they even get a practice in?
It would probably be the morning skate on the Tuesday, right? Like, there's not much practice going on at this point in the playoffs. The players, are okay. Tell us what we need to know. They load them up with tons and tons of video, and certainly that'll be in place. You have people that were dedicated. You have to believe, and not believe. We know that it's true that somebody was dedicated to prepare everything. If Florida won for that winter, they were watching that series closely. But I think that it'll be the morning skate of Tuesday before the players hit the ice together again.
Craig, I wanted to go back to what you just said about Carolina having that advantage, wanting to get up on top early. But for the Panthers, at least opening on the road, is there some advantage for them coming off a 7-game series in that they will have a game to acclimate in the series on the road and don't necessarily have to get game 1 in order to take back home ice advantage in game 2, should they not win the opener?
They didn't win the first 2 games against Toronto, and then they went 1-4 the next 5. So I don't think that the Florida Panthers are daunted by anything. Starting at home, starting on the road, losing the first 2 games on the road. They're a team that's hardened. You get to this point. I mean, this is their 3rd consecutive Eastern Conference final. They've been to the Stanley Cup final. They know who they are. They know what they are. Like it's going to be important for Carolina to try to do things to unsettle Florida, to try to get them. Neil talked about idiosyncrasies. What can the Carolina Hurricanes do to really draw the attention of the Florida Panthers? Florida left Toronto after losing the first 2 games. I still don't think they respected Toronto after losing the first 2 games. I think they just left. We're going home, no problem. This team doesn't scare us. I think they left after game 6 in Florida, going back to Toronto, going, we're not worried.
Yeah.
Carolina has to put some worry into Florida's minds.
Yeah, and that's tough to do.
Uh-huh.
During this regular season, the Panthers won 2 out of 3, outscoring the Hurricanes 13-6. All right, gentlemen. Neil, I'll start with you. Pick on this series.
I'm not going to go full chicken. I'm just going to go like if I was at Swiss Chalet, Craig. I'll go with the half chicken and fries, but I'm going Florida in 6.
Mr. Button.
Bach, half chicken and fries too. I'm going Panthers in 6. I'm not seeing the lights that Seinfeld saw, the Kramer with the chicken lights outside his thing. Yeah. I think Florida, they have the speed, they have the depth. You talked about the 3rd line earlier, Vic. And, one of the things I thought, and we're going to get to this later, I thought that Jordan Staal really played really well. He neutralized Pierre-Luc Dubois. Well, you got Barkov, you got Bennett, you got Lundell. I don't think Carolina can neutralize all 3 of them at the same time.
Hey, Craig, you live in Canada. Speaking of chickens, How often do you go to Swiss Chalet?
Not that often, to be honest with you.
Okay. It must be just us expats that when we come home, there are three things we have to have when we go home. And that is Tim Hortons, Swiss Chalet, and the third one is, I think, pizza. But
there you go.
But
See,
Tim
I grew up in Montreal, Neil.
Oh, so I know. So Saint Hubert.
I'm Saint Hubert. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know. I used to argue. I argue with Martin Madden all the time about what was better, Saint Hubert or Swiss Chalet. So I get it,
right? So
yeah, I get it.
So that's why nothing against Swiss Chalet, but I got a real loyalty to Saint Hubert.
And by the way, listeners, nobody cares that I agree with Neil and Craig, and I like the Panthers in 6 as well, because this is just a special group. And I think they've just got too much jam, too much sandpaper, and they will find a way the same way they did against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And before we move to the West, a reminder that our website is NHLWraparound.com. Neil and I will return on Wednesday with Stanley Cup date as we look at Game 1 of the East and preview Game 1 of the West. And our special on the New York Islanders' 45th anniversary of their first Stanley Cup drops on Saturday, Doormat to Dynasty. Neil and I were joined by Denny Potvin, John Tonelli, and Ken Morrow. With that, we move over to the West, where the Dallas Stars and Edmonton Oilers will meet for the second consecutive year in the conference final. Last year, the Oilers took the series in 6 games, winning the last 3. This is the 10th time that they have met in the postseason, going back to 1984 when the Stars franchise was in Minnesota. Dallas did win the series over the course of the regular season, 2-1, scoring 4 goals in all 3 games. But we open here that perhaps the biggest single difference in the Dallas team this year compared to last, Craig, the Mikko Rantanen factor.
Wow. I mean, Mikko's been good. I also think Jake Ottinger's been really good. Jake Ottinger has found a level of play that has been really significant. And in fact, if you look at that series versus Winnipeg, I think it ultimately came down to Jake Ottinger had the edge over Connor Hellebuck. And, we know what Rantanen did early in the series, and you watch how the Dallas Stars, and then I'll go to the other Finnish guy. Getting Heiskanen back is a game changer. Like, we know Rantanen's a game changer, but, it's a redux of last year's Western Conference final. Both teams are a little bit different, and it sets up as a pretty good, I think a pretty good set in terms of who gets to the Stanley Cup final. But Rantanen he's been there, done that. Interestingly enough, listening to the Dallas Stars players talk about Rantanen, how calm and composed he is, and Rantanen talking about how calm and composed their team is, it feels like Dallas is at a point now where it's just about business. It's just about business. We just got to go about our business and find a way to get the better of Edmonton. They played pretty well last year versus Edmonton. They couldn't find a way to beat them.
And part of the business is that, as you just mentioned, they have Heiskanen back, and Peter DeBoer has been going 11-7. But the 3 games that Heiskanen has been back in the lineup, 14:52, 18:33, and then bumped up to 23:40 of ice time. Overtime game in the series clincher against Winnipeg was under 2 minutes. So is he ready to go back to 12-6 at this point, now that Heiskanen is logging more and closer to what his normal ice time would be?
Yeah, what I would say real quickly is that when you have a horse on the blue line that can play that many minutes, and Neil had 2 of them when he won the Stanley Cup, and Brian Leetch and Sergei Zubov, and they could play all night long. Heiskanen can play all night long. I think that, it becomes, if you dress 7, whether he sits in the stands or sits on the bench, I don't think that's a problem. I think that what Peter DeBoer finds by going 11-7, he can double up Rantanen and get different matchups deeper down the lineup. And I think Peter likes that. And that's why I don't think it's about protecting Heiskanen anymore. I think it's about giving him the opportunity to get Rantanen more reps.
Neil, Rantanen looked a little bit gassed towards the end of the final game of the Winnipeg series. And when you're talking now, him going up against a team that plays so fast, the way the Edmonton Oilers do, is this a different animal here in this series?
Well, I think they're definitely different playing against McDavid and Draisaitl, but there's a lot of differences between the Dallas Stars and the Edmonton Oilers in my mind, and it starts in goal. Craig already mentioned how good Ottinger is playing, and he really is. Like, he was so impressive against Hellebuck, and he had something to prove too, because those two guys were the goalies for Team USA in the Four Nations, and Ottinger's looking forward, saying, "Well, I got to prove that I'm better than him. I want to be the starter on the next Team USA." I'm sure that's in his mind, and it should be. He's a competitor, and he wants to do that. I'm really looking forward to this series. I think that there's some flaws in Edmonton that can be exposed, even though they've got these great players. And don't forget Zach Hyman, don't forget Evan Bouchard, obviously McDavid and Draisaitl, but then they've got guys that are reborn, like Corey Perry. Like, you've got a line, Craig, there's a line on Edmonton of 3 Hart Trophy winners playing on the same line together in McDavid, Draisaitl, and Perry. I mean, I know Perry won it a century ago, but he still has won it. And they're getting contributions too from guys like Evander Kane, who doesn't play all season long and all of a sudden shows up in the playoffs and has an impact. And it's going to be really fun this series to see the Rantanen factor. I think that's going to be great. I think Dallas does need more out of Robertson. He's got to score in the playoffs. He didn't score as much as they did, but both these teams have depth scoring too. They got guys like Sam Steele, who suddenly come through for Dallas, and on the other end, you got like Henrique was coming through for the Oilers even in late in his career, and others. So it's going to be a fun series, I think. But I hate to keep going back to goaltending, but I got to. There's no contest between Skinner and Pickard and Ottinger in my mind. Ottinger is the better guy of both of them. So that will be where Dallas can expose that. Then they've got a real edge.
Yeah, I agree with that, Neil. I think that despite the fact that Skinner had those back-to-back shutouts in games 4 and 5 versus Vegas, and give him his props for just getting in there and doing what he needed to do. But I think that the ability of the Dallas Stars to play low-scoring games, to be able to push, and they need Robertson, they need Duchesne, they need those two guys to be more threatening. Everybody, and Neil, you know this, you want every player to score, but the first thing you got to do is be a threat. And I've been more concerned about Robertson. Duchesne's had chances. I've been more concerned about Robertson. He doesn't even look dangerous out there. He looks like a player that's like kind of finding his way. He looks like a young kid playing in his first playoffs. So they need him to be a lot more dangerous. When I watch the Edmonton Oilers, they've dialed in darn well offensively as we would expect them with that depth scoring. But if they get exposed like they did against LA, they're not going to win this series.
They played extremely well away from the puck in that Vegas series. And another point I want to make here is we know that the top guns for Edmonton are going to produce because they just do. And they've gotten the secondary scoring, as Neil had pointed out. And Dallas has gotten scoring from Mikael Granlund, who had a hat trick. Evgeny Dadonov has produced. But as you'd mentioned, they're going to need more from their frontline guys. And you did mention Matt Duchene. Mason Marchment hasn't had a great playoff. Wyatt Johnston hasn't performed up to snuff in addition to Jason Robertson. So perhaps a determining factor here is whether or not the big shooters for Dallas are going to step to the forefront here.
I think Rupe Hintz and Rantanen are definitely going to be step up. But you're right on those other names. I mean, Robertson is a great goal scorer. Wyatt Johnson last year impressed us so much that, Vic, you picked him as your breakout player of the year when we did our preview show for the season. And Mason Marchment, we all know, that he is a good player and can do some damage. But they've all got to be going. And that's why I said I'm just so looking forward to this series. I think it's going to be a great one.
I do too. And, without me asking you, Vic, I think one of the advantages that Dallas has, not just in the net, they have two guys in Heiskanen and Harley that can go out against Draisaitl or McDavid. They're not going to be vulnerable. Okay, who do we put against McDavid? Those two guys can play against those two top guys, and they can skate with them and play with them, and they can play the big minutes. Vegas didn't have that. And certainly LA didn't have that. Dallas has that. And I think when you start, that goes to Neil's point about getting scoring deeper down your lineup. Where can you get that? And I think that's going to be something that Edmonton's going to continue to need. But it's a fascinating series. I'm not so sure it's going to be high scoring. I'm not so sure it's not going to be low scoring. I think it's going to be a series where we're going to get a lot of twists and turns.
So with that, Peter DeBoer is probably the ultimate bridesmaid head coach in the NHL right now. He's got 2 losses in the Stanley Cup Finals. One is head coach of the New Jersey Devils. One is head coach of the San Jose Sharks. And he's lost 5 times in the conference finals since 2019. Does he break it in this series? Chickens, step forward and announce your predictions.
Well, Neil went first last time. I'll have to go first this time. You think about Peter's record. It's a very, very impressive record. And I don't think, and again, 3 straight years in the Western Conference Final for the Dallas Stars. I always say it's hard to bet against 97 and 29 in Edmonton. And it feels like they're on a mission. It does. But to me, I think that Dallas wins this. I think Dallas finds a way to win Game 7. On home ice. in overtime of Game 7.
Woof.
I'm predicting that the final will end up being a reunion of the Windsor Spitfires. Because Peter DeBoer versus Paul Maurice. Great friends, along with Adam Graves. The 3 of them are great friends. And I think that would be a lot of fun to see. I think Dallas is going to beat Edmonton too. And I didn't know I would be saying this a month ago. I really didn't. But I got to tell you, Jim Nill has done a fantastic job. When he jumped out and got Granlund and Ceci early, I said it was great that he went out, he knew what he wanted, and he grabbed it. But then to get Rantanen added into his lineup has changed my thoughts on them. They are, they're good now. They're really good. And they proved it against the best regular season team in the league in the Winnipeg Jets. I think Peter DeBoer and his team are going to win it. And I hate to put back on that San Diego chicken outfit that I wear so well. But I do think it's going to come down to Dallas in 7. And you know what? Just throw the bones in the garbage.
I'll see if they can outfit that for a 6'2" individual.
What's fascinating about it too is, Neil talked about the Windsor reunion. Paul Maurice hired Peter DeBoer to come in and help him while Peter was in law school. Peter's a lawyer. Like, he went to law school. And so Paul, because they were friends, said, why don't you come and just help us out a little bit? And, now you got Peter, who's had a fantastic run in junior hockey and the NHL for certain. We know what Paul has done, and they're great friends, along with Adam Graves. They're great friends. I'd like to know what the wager would be between Paul and Peter going into a Stanley Cup final against one another. They'd be disappointed whoever lost, and they'd be happy for the other guy. I'm pretty sure of that.
They need a Mary to go along with them, though. They need to get the Peter, Paul, and Mary.
No, Paul. Well, can Adam change his name?
Yeah. To Mary. Yeah. Mary Graves.
Why not? Well, it really is something. I remember Scott and Rob Niedermayer's mother, Carol, saying before the 2003 Stanley Cup final, who are you rooting for? And she says, I'm rooting for Rob. Scott's already won Stanley Cups. Scott did win the Stanley Cup once again, but she got to see Rob win his own in 2007 alongside his brother. So I think it sets up as a big time Southern USA Stanley Cup battle. I really do, Vic.
And Vic, before you make your pick, I'm sitting with bated breath waiting for that.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
I want to ask Craig, if Dallas wins, the team that you picked, you must come back on with your Dallas Stars Stanley Cup ring on. Because this man was part of the only Dallas Stars Stanley Cup back in 1999.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay,
correct.
Vic, we're all waiting for this.
Perhaps we needed Prince to sing that song for you. Party like it's 1999. Yes, because you were sitting on this and because I am dumber yet have more bravado than both of you. I like the Stars also in this. And I think their scoring up front will start to shine through a little bit more. And I like them in 6 games as opposed to the 7 that you two from Colonel Sanders' house.
So are we going to say in our standings, since we all picked the same team and we can't move up or down, then it's not fair. So if they win in 6, you get an extra point for that. And if they win in 7, well, we get the extra point.
Yeah. You get an extra piece.
Yeah, because otherwise we can't move up or down in the standings because we've all taken the same team.
Yeah.
It's all in good fun.
What's your record, Vic? You said Neil's record is 9-3. I'm 8-4. What is your record?
7-5, but we move on.
Oh, okay. Hey, listen, picking them in 6. That's a bold move. Now you could move to 9 here with the right and really be in contention for the overall victory. You could be like journalism in the Preakness.
That's true. So we got to hang our hat on something.
And Vic is also saying by that pick that Dallas is actually going to win that series in Canada, which is a bold statement.
Which would actually be fitting because then it would put another year on the Canadian misery without having a Stanley Cup.
No, that's true. I don't know that it's Canadian misery, but it's a fact. Is everybody up there miserable because the country Canada hasn't won a cup?
I don't know. Neil, you know how it is. I mean, people in Canada all sit here and they think that the Stanley Cup is theirs, hockey is theirs, that nobody else should be able to have the Stanley Cup. Nobody else should be able to have hockey. It reminds me of British soccer. The reason the Brits haven't moved forward in years is because they celebrate something from 1966. And that's the last time the Brits won the World Cup. So to me, we got Canadians playing all around the league. We got 32 teams in the league. We see great buildings and everything. And at the end of it all, celebrate just how lucky we are to be part of it and these great buildings and everything. But, Neil, with all the miserable winters that Canadians have to go through, it's hard to believe that they can't get over the misery of not having the Stanley Cup in Canada. And this is the other thing. I'm on a rant now, so you got to bear with me here. People go, well, yeah, we want Canada to win. I said, really? Really? You want to see the Toronto Maple Leafs win if you live in Montreal? I don't think so. In fact, I know so. If you live in Calgary, you want to see the Edmonton Oilers win? No darn way. Listen, you root for your own team, and that's who you want to see win the cup. You're not rooting for Canada. There's nobody outside of Edmonton that's rooting for the Edmonton Oilers to win the cup. And there's nobody outside of Toronto ever rooting for the Leafs to win the cup.
May I take your hand and get you off that soapbox? Because we have one random question for you before we let you go. And that is, we've got 2 rounds of the Stanley Cup behind us. Is there one thing that has taken you completely off guard during these opening rounds, be it player, be it team?
You go first, Craig.
I think the way Carolina has gone about their business. We look at Carolina, we look at the way they're built, and we know what they do. We know what they do well. And to me, the way and I'll say it, I thought Washington looked a step behind, even 2 steps behind the whole series. And with that, Jordan Staal looks like he's found that 2009 Jordan Staal-esque play. He's been really impressive. So, I'll let Neil go first on the West, and I'll finish on the East. And in the East here, I think that it didn't surprise me that Toronto went out, because when they show you what they are, believe them. And they've done it for 9 years. And with that, you look at that third line, Brad Marchand, Anton Lundell, and Luosterainen. Wow. And I agree with you, Vic. I don't think Carolina has an answer for that third line.
All right, Neil, you're up.
Jim Montgomery is my first pick that took me completely off guard. He did an unbelievable job of finishing the regular season and then scaring the bejeebas out of Kevin Cheveldayoff and his organization by going right down to the wire. 7 games. I mean, it was just incredible. I never saw St. Louis coming like they did. And he did a remarkable job for a guy that got stupidly fired by Boston early in the season. Goes right into St. Louis and does the job he did. I couldn't have seen that coming. I think it's amazing what he did there. And in the East, I guess the thing that sort of stunned me was how what a church mouse Tampa Bay Lightning ended up being. They just were as quiet as a church mouse. They were just like they were in and out of the playoffs so quick, and so disappointing. I think as one of the contenders, they put up the least amount of a fight of any of the, let's say, handful of contenders going into the first round.
I agree with that, Neil. It's almost like you make the playoffs, and it's hard to make the playoffs in the National Hockey League. But when you go out the way the Tampa Bay Lightning did, it's kind of like, oh, the playoffs. Like you can't even say we made the playoffs and we had a good. It was really good. We had some good experience. So, and like they were the way Neil described it. Yeah. They were meek.
I'm going to go a little bit off the grid here and use my 2 teams as the ones that faced off against each other in the 1993 Cup final. I'm going to start East, and just the emergence of a lot of the Montreal Canadiens players that I think we saw them come of age, even though they dropped their first round series to the Washington Capitals. I thought to see Nick Suzuki and to watch Cole Caulfield and Yuri Slafkovsky and, of course, Lane Hudson and the strength and goal that they had with Sam Montembeault, even though he was unable to finish the series. And even though it is very possible they take a step back next season, I thought the way they matured and came on at the end of the year was something really encouraging for Canadian fans. And in the West, the LA Kings collapse in the first round was something that I don't ever remember seeing a club being able to dominate so early in games and then fold up their tent towards the back end. So those are mine.
Those are good ones. I'll tell you, those are real good. I think all of them, Craig's, they're all good ones. They're all things that happen in the playoffs because we didn't have what we normally have, which is an 8 seed beat a first seed or a 7 seed beat a 2 seed. We didn't have anything. We've basically, if you were gone away to Europe and you came back now and you said, well, it's Dallas, Edmonton, and Carolina and Florida, they were saying, okay, that's what I thought it would be, So but those are things I think we've touched on that are surprising stuff that's gone on during this playoffs.
And to your point, Vic, really quickly here about Montreal. See, that's the difference between Montreal and Tampa. They both went out in 5 games, but Montreal had fight in them. And Montreal were not quite as a church mouse. Like they really showed you something. And, the LA Kings, that was a wasted opportunity because they had the Edmonton Oilers down and out.
Yeah.
Well, death, taxes, and Craig Button joining us to go over the playoffs every 2 weeks. Thanks again for joining us. And why not? Let's do this for the Cup final.
You're on, Vic. It's so much fun to just exchange thoughts and ideas. And, I start to, okay, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point, like that. So, it's a great exchange. We all have our own ideas, but we learn as well. I certainly learned from you two guys. So I really appreciate you having me on. And I look forward to the Stanley Cup final predictions.
And what's more fun about this than doing TV is that you don't have somebody in your ear saying rap, 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 like you do on, right, Craig? That's what you got all the time. So you gotta put that 10 pounds of BS into a 5-pound bag, right? And hurry up and get it said and shut up so that we can go to commercial break or let the host talk again.
Exactly right. So Vic, thanks for leading the way. One other thing, too, I wanted to really say, too, I thought the broadcast on Saturday night, both in the U.S. and Canada, the Winnipeg, Dallas, the producers on that broadcast in both countries, I thought it was phenomenal. A very difficult story to tell with Mark Scheifele's father passing. And boy, did they, from start to finish and everywhere in between, I thought that both Canadian and U.S. networks did a phenomenal job of TV broadcasting. I know Vic and Neil, you can appreciate that because that's not an easy story to tell.
Great job documenting it and fitting it within the proper framework of the game and captured all the drama, the handshakes at the end. Yeah. You felt it at home. And that's what makes a great telecast. And that's a wrap. As we have seen during the previous 2 playoff previews, there's nobody more fun just to sit around and talk hockey with Craig Button. It's like 3 buddies over a beer.
He's a hockey lifer. His dad was a hockey lifer, the chief scout of the Washington Capitals under David Poile, Jack Button. He left us way too young, but then Craig and Todd are the sons of Jack Button and both been very successful. And Craig, of course, was the general manager of the Calgary Flames at one point. Now he does a great job on TSN in Canada evaluating young players.
A little bit of conference final news. Defenseman Jaden Chatfield for the Carolina Hurricanes listed as questionable per head coach Rod Brindamore for Game 1 against the Florida Panthers if he is unable to go. Rookie Alexander Kishin will be drawing into the lineup. He played in the 5th and final game against the Washington Capitals. And something else I think we want to share with our listeners, that we're so appreciative of you supporting us and our various brands through the first 16 months or so Neil and I have been doing this. As you know, most of our guests have been media, management, and we've had the occasional player on, but we're looking to expand that and have more current NHL players visiting NHL Wraparound starting next season.
And if there's anything else you'd like to hear or see on this podcast, please put it in an email. We're always interested in how we're doing with you folks out there and if we're giving you what you want. So please let us know.
This is the human side of the story. Saturday evening, we saw Winnipeg forward Mark Scheifele playing with the heaviest of hearts, having lost his dad on Friday, and he decided Saturday morning, if not before, that he was going to play in that 6th game against the Dallas Stars. He spoke with his mom, decided to go ahead and play, had an impact on the game, clearly scoring a goal, having some other chances. Unfortunately, he was in the penalty box when the series deciding goal by Thomas Harley went in. But there have also been other instances where players have had to perform immediately following the loss of a loved one. And we can think back to 2014 with Martin St. Louis having lost his mother with the Rangers on the verge of elimination in the 2nd round against the Pittsburgh Penguins. He decides to play in Game 5. The Rangers bring the series back to the Garden for Game 6. He scores the opening goal of the game for the Rangers. That was on Mother's Day, by the way. And he winds up getting the game-winning assist on Brad Richards' goal in Game 7. And if you go back a little bit further, 2003, quarterback Brett Favre, who was playing with the Green Bay Packers, lost his dad, who he was very close to, on a Monday night game, throws for 399 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 41-7 Packers win. But it just goes to show that the character and the fortitude of being able to move forward while you're grieving is something in professional athletes that is quite remarkable.
It is. And I think what happens is all these fellas that have been athletes their whole life and gone up through the ranks to get to where they are in major league sports, you know, their parents are behind them all the way. And I think when you lose a parent, a loved one, a grandfather, grandmother, whatever the case may be, you can think of what would they want me to do? And that's what you end up doing, because it's to just grieve and say, I'm not going to play tonight because I'm going to grieve, or I'm going to honor them by not playing, isn't the proper way to honor them. Probably the proper way to honor them is to go and play and make them proud of you. And Mark Scheifele did that. I want to say too that his dad died suddenly. This was not a long disease or something like that. And so it came as a shock to Mark. And you could see once the game was over that the emotions were going to start to flood out of him about losing his dad, Brad, who was so close to him.
And certainly the compassion and empathy showed by the Dallas Stars on the other side. And as we mentioned on Stanley Cup date, Jamie Benn, who the two of them tangled a game earlier in that series, and it was Ben who led the handshake line for the Stars and embraced Scheifele for a good 15 seconds. And I think for so many of these athletes, it's cathartic to play, and it's a distraction, which serves them in a good way to be able to deal with their grief.
Right. And, you know, when grief comes your way, and it comes to everybody at some point, and maybe multiple points, when you can do exercise, just exercise will help you, because your mind can't go there while you're, you know, huffing and puffing and trying to do whatever you do for exercise. So imagine playing in a National Hockey League playoff game and the amount of energy you've got to use. Your mind doesn't have space. You're trying to take it moment by moment in a game, and that's why you escape from it for a while. But when the game is over, as I just finished saying, it all comes back into your head, and that's when the grief it comes in heavy duty.
And you as a general manager, you're almost a father figure to your athletes and your staff. And certainly you have been no stranger with having to be compassionate and be there in times of need for athletes.
Yeah, well, actually, it's interesting because we had Ty Domi when he was just a rookie, and he had played a great game at Madison Square Garden for us. Roger Nielsen was the coach, and Ty was one of the stars of the game. He came off the ice, and it was Roger's task to have to tell Ty that his father had died when he came off the ice after the game. And I actually got the game puck from the game and flew to Windsor, Ontario, and was attended the funeral and gave Ty the puck to put with his dad. I think he did end up putting it in his coffin. And so that was one instance. I had another instance happen with the Rangers where our trainer, equipment manager, Joe Murphy, he lost his son in a car accident on the West Coast, Joe Jr. And Colin Campbell was the head coach at the time. He was the one that had to tell Joe Murphy that his son had been killed. I mean, how horrible and awful is that to have to deliver that news? But you got to do it, and you got to get through it.
Rough stuff, but also something that makes the hockey community and the NHL in particular so special is the way people pull together.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's absolutely right. And they're there to support you when you have a loss. It's a very tight-knit community, really. With all the fighting and the stuff that goes on, it's a very tightly knit group.
And very special to be a part of. And that will conclude NHL Wraparound for today. Once again, our thanks to Craig Button from TSN for joining us, and thanks to UBS Financial Services, Inc. NHL Wraparound and UBS Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated. UBS is a sponsor of 3 things you need to pay attention to. No other affiliation, relationship, or endorsement is made, suggested, intended, or should be implied or inferred between UBS and VNS Productions, LLC, or any of the individuals or businesses and or their respective products and services appearing in this program. Thanks to our terrific listeners. Send questions or comments to nhlwraparound@gmail.com. And you can also reach us individually at neil@nhlwraparound.com or vic@nhlwraparound.com. And a reminder that all of our shows are available on all podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, and our complete catalog can be found on our website, nhlwraparound.com. So please subscribe, like us on Facebook, and also check out some of our shorter clips on X at NHL Wraparound. Neil and I will be back with you on Wednesday with the latest edition of Stanley Cup Date. So until then, enjoy the start of the conference final.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.